Some people get a brand new BMW for Christmas. I got a plastic piggy bank with 2 crumpled dollar bills inside, and a lecture about being responsible with money. My name is Samantha Reed. I'm 34 years old, and I'm about to tell you how $2 taught me exactly what my family thought I was worth, and how I used that knowledge to destroy their perfect little world. This isn't just another family drama. This is about the moment you realize that the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally have been keeping score your entire life. And sometimes the only way to win a rigged game is to stop playing altogether. Christmas morning in Denver started like every other holiday in the Morrison household. Picture-perfect suburban home, artificial tree dripping with expensive ornaments, and my younger sister Bailey dancing around like she'd just won the lottery. Which, in a way, she had. The BMW sat in the driveway like a metallic white trophy, complete with an enormous red bow that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My parents watched Bailey's reaction with the kind of pure joy usually reserved for watching children take their first steps. Meanwhile, I sat on the carpet, holding a children's piggy bank shaped like a cartoon pig I hadn't cared about since elementary school. The price tag still dangled from its plastic snout. $1.99 from the clearance bin at some discount store. Inside, 2 wrinkled dollar bills waited like a cruel punchline to a joke I'd been living my entire life. Dad cleared his throat, straightening his shoulders the way he did when delivering what he considered profound wisdom. Consider it the foundation of your future home fund, Samantha. You've always been so practical with finances, unlike certain people in this family. He shot Bailey a playful look, as if her financial irresponsibility was endearing rather than enabled. Mom nodded enthusiastically, her hands clasped together like she was announcing a scholarship program. Bailey needs reliable transportation for her photography clients. Image matters in creative industries, you understand. The casual dismissal in her voice hit like a physical blow. As if my career as a structural engineer, designing buildings that would outlast all of us, was somehow less important than Bailey's weekend photo shoots. Bailey plopped down beside me, designer perfume overwhelming my senses. Don't worry, Sam. I'll totally give you rides whenever you need them. She patted my knee with the kind of condescending gentleness you'd use on a confused, elderly relative. That old Honda of yours must be falling apart by now. The Honda that I'd driven through Colorado mountain passes in blizzards. The Honda I'd paid off completely 2 years early through overtime and careful budgeting. The Honda that had never once left me stranded, unlike the relationships in this room. But this wasn't new. This was just the latest installment in a lifetime series I like to call Why Samantha Doesn't Matter. The episodes had been running since I was 5 years old, when Bailey got a princess birthday party with pony rides while I got a sheet cake and 2 friends from kindergarten. The excuse was always the same. I was independent, responsible, didn't need the extra attention that Bailey required. What they meant was, you're useful, so we don't need to invest in your happiness. I excused myself to the bathroom, my legs somehow carrying me upstairs I'd climbed thousands of times before. In the mirror, my reflection looked exactly like someone who'd just been valued at $2 by the people who were supposed to love her most. I pressed my palms against the cold marble countertop, waiting for tears that refused to come. Instead, something else built in my chest, a pressure that felt like decades of swallowed words crystallizing into something sharp and unforgiving. Downstairs, I could hear Bailey planning road trips with my parents, their voices bright with excitement about adventures I'd never be invited to join. At 34 years old, I was still the family afterthought, the reliable daughter who didn't need celebration because she always figured things out on her own. That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom, the one that had never been redecorated because Samantha doesn't care about that stuff, and made a decision that would change everything. I packed my essential belongings while the house slept. My grandmother's jewelry, photo albums from college, the blueprint from my first major project. I left behind every expensive gift I'd given them over the years, purchases that had required months of saving and careful planning. My house key felt cold against my palm as I placed it on the kitchen counter beside a note I'd written on the back of a grocery receipt. Thank you for teaching me my worth. I'm going to find people who value me at more than $2. The highways were empty at 3 a.m. on Christmas morning as I drove toward a future I couldn't yet imagine. Snow began falling as I crossed into Utah, each flake catching my headlights like tiny stars. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls from my parents, but the messages weren't asking if I was safe or begging me to come home. They were asking who would handle the electric bill for their vacation cabin and whether I'd left the Christmas turkey preparations somewhere they could find them. Even in crisis, I was still just the family problem solver. But here's where the story takes a turn that nobody, including me, saw coming. I drove straight to San Francisco, where my college roommate Maya had been begging me to visit for years. Maya took one look at my face and made up the guest room without asking questions. Within a week, I'd transferred to my company's Bay Area office. Within a month, I had my own apartment, small but mine, filled with light and possibility instead of resentment. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't sending money home to cover Bailey's credit card bills or my parents' vacation expenses. I wasn't buying elaborate birthday gifts that would be opened with polite disinterest. I was spending money on myself, therapy sessions, pottery classes, a wardrobe that made me feel confident instead of invisible. The transformation wasn't instant. 34 years of conditioning doesn't disappear overnight. But slowly, methodically, I began building a life where my worth wasn't determined by how useful I could be to other people. I got promoted to senior project manager. I started dating an environmental scientist named David who thought my engineering brain was fascinating rather than intimidating. I learned to make pottery, creating beautiful, imperfect bowls with my own hands. My family's reaction to my disappearance followed a predictable pattern. First confusion, then concern, then manipulation wrapped in parental authority. Dad threatened to report my car stolen, forgetting it was titled in my name and paid off with my money. Mom called my office claiming family emergencies that mysteriously resolved themselves when I didn't immediately rush home. Bailey's messages evolved from sisterly concern to barely concealed panic. "I miss you so much," she'd text, followed by questions about whether I could co-sign for her new apartment or loan her money for camera equipment. When I didn't respond, the messages became more desperate. "Dad says you're having a breakdown. Mom's seeing a doctor for stress. Don't you care about family anymore?" I cared. That was the problem. I'd cared so much for so long that I'd forgotten to care about myself. But 6 months into my new life, something unexpected started happening. Maya began sharing information she'd gathered from mutual friends back home. Information that painted a very different picture of the Morrison family's perfect facade. Dad had been laid off from his management position 3 months after Christmas. The company's budget cuts had targeted his department specifically, eliminating positions for people who'd been coasting on past achievements rather than delivering current results. Funny how they'd never mentioned that during their financial lectures about my irresponsible decision to leave. Mom had started seeing a therapist for anxiety and depression, but not because I'd left. Because the family's financial house of cards was finally collapsing, and she was terrified of losing the lifestyle they'd built on credit and entitlement. The vacation cabin they'd guilt-tripped me into managing was in foreclosure. The BMW they'd bought Bailey was being repossessed. And Bailey? Bailey was drowning. Her photography business had never been profitable. How could it be when she'd never learned to manage money, set boundaries with clients, or handle rejection? Without my parents' financial safety net and my annual bailouts, she was working retail jobs and sleeping on friends' couches. The family that had taught me I was worth $2 was learning their own value in the marketplace of real consequences. Here's where the revenge gets delicious, though I didn't plan it that way. Remember, the best revenge isn't about plotting and scheming. It's about living so well that your absence becomes impossible to ignore. Cousin Rachel's wedding invitation arrived 8 months after my Christmas escape. Ivory cardstock with my name in elegant script. Samantha Morrison. No +1, of course. Just me, expected to return to the family fold like a wayward sheep ready for shearing. I RSVP'd yes, but this time I controlled the terms. Hotel room booked 4 blocks from the venue. Rental car reserved in my name. New dress commissioned in midnight blue, the color of deep water and unshakable resolve. The night before the wedding, I did something that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. I prepared evidence. Bank statements showing the loans I'd been making to my family for years. Copies of birthday cards spanning 3 decades, highlighting the difference in emotional investment. Photos from family celebrations where the favoritism was so obvious it was almost cartoonish. I wasn't planning to destroy anyone. I was planning to defend myself with facts instead of feelings. The rehearsal dinner buzzed with extended family members who greeted me like I'd returned from the dead. "You look incredible," Aunt Susan whispered, squeezing my hand. "Different. Stronger." She glanced toward my parents, huddled in a corner booth looking smaller than I remembered. "Your dad's been struggling since the layoff. And your mother's been seeing someone about her nerves." Bailey approached cautiously, her designer facade replaced by something more genuine. The expensive watch was gone, her highlights grown out to reveal natural brown hair. "You really do look amazing," she said, but her smile seemed forced. "I've missed you." I nodded politely, maintaining the emotional distance I'd worked so hard to create. "How's business?" I asked, though Maya had already told me the answer. Bailey's eyes darted away. "Transitioning. Exploring new markets." Which was creative speak for failing spectacularly while refusing to admit it. The real confrontation came the next morning in the bridal suite, where I was helping Rachel with her veil when Aunt Susan found me. "Your parents want to see you in the library. They said it's urgent." I knew this moment would come. 7 months of silence had apparently reached its breaking point. They were waiting in formation when I entered the library, Dad pacing by the fireplace, Mom positioned in a high-backed chair with tissues already in hand, Bailey standing by the window like a reluctant witness. The staging was theatrical, designed to overwhelm me with their unified disappointment. "Sit down, Samantha," Dad commanded, gesturing to a chair positioned to face all 3 of them. "This family meeting is long overdue." I closed the door behind me but remained standing. "I'm listening." Bailey stepped forward, apparently designated as the family spokesperson. "Sam, this has gone far enough. Dad lost his job. Mom's been sick with worry. We're selling the house." Her voice carried the practiced rhythm of a rehearsed speech. "All because you abandoned us at Christmas." The guilt missile launched with precision, aimed at the part of me that had always absorbed their problems as my own responsibility. 7 months ago, it would have found its target. Today I had armor. "I'm sorry about Dad's job," I said calmly, settling into the indicated chair. "And Mom, I'm glad you're getting professional help. I opened my purse and removed a leather photo album. Since we're having this conversation, I brought something to share. Mom frowned. We don't have time for. You called this meeting, I interrupted, opening the album on my lap. So we have time. The first page displayed 2 birthday parties side by side. Bailey's elaborate princess extravaganza with hired entertainers and a 3-tier castle cake. Next to my celebration the following year, grocery store sheet cake and 2 friends from school. The contrast was undeniable. Remember these? I flipped through pages documenting Christmas mornings, graduations, and family vacations where the pattern of favoritism played out in living color. I spent months collecting evidence of what I always felt but couldn't prove. Dad's face reddened. This is ridiculous. We always treated you girls equally. I pulled out a manila folder containing financial records I'd compiled through public documents and my own painful memories. My student loans, $73,000 that I'm still paying. Bailey's education expenses, fully funded, including her European art tour junior year. Bailey shifted uncomfortably. That's not fair. You chose engineering. That was your decision. It was my passion, I corrected. Just like photography is yours. The difference is, my passion wasn't considered worth investing in. Mom rose from her chair, hands trembling with either genuine emotion or practiced manipulation. We didn't have the money when you went to college. The economy was different. Dad's promotion to regional manager happened when I was 16. I interrupted, consulting my notes. Grandpa Morrison's inheritance arrived before my freshman year. You had money. You chose not to spend it on me. The room fell silent except for the distant sounds of wedding preparations beyond the door. I reached into my purse one final time and placed the plastic piggy bank on the coffee table between us. Dad stared at it like I'd set a live grenade in the center of the room. What is that supposed to prove? I removed the rubber stopper, and dozens of crisp $2 bills spilled across the mahogany surface. Unusual currency that caught the light and commanded attention. I've saved a $2 bill for every week since Christmas, I explained, watching their faces process the visual metaphor. This isn't about money. It's about what you thought I was worth. Bailey picked up one of the bills, turning it over in her fingers. Her voice, when she spoke, lacked its usual defensive edge. I never realized how it looked from your perspective. They never taught me how to stand on my own. The admission hung in the air like confession. But I wasn't finished. From my folder, I produced documents that Maya had helped me obtain through her connections in the legal field. Public records are fascinating things when you know where to look. The house you're selling? I placed the foreclosure notice on top of the scattered bills. It's not because Dad lost his job 3 months ago. It's because you've been in financial trouble for 2 years, ever since you took out a second mortgage to cover Bailey's credit card debt and business expenses. Mom's carefully applied mascara began to streak. How did you? Bailey's photography business has been operating at a loss since day one, I continued, removing additional documents. Credit card debt currently sits at $47,000 across 6 different cards. The BMW was leased, not purchased, with payments you couldn't afford. When I stopped sending money for family emergencies, the whole system collapsed. The beauty of it was, I hadn't planned any of this as revenge. I'd simply stopped enabling their dysfunction, and the natural consequences had unfolded exactly as they should have. Dad sank into the nearest chair, his authority deflating like a punctured balloon. We never meant for things to get this complicated. You never meant to get caught, I corrected. There's a difference. Bailey's voice cracked as she spoke. I don't know how to fix this, Sam. I never learned how to survive without help. 7 months earlier, that confession would have triggered my rescue reflex. I would have immediately offered solutions, money, a place to stay. The old Samantha would have added this crisis to her collection of family burdens. Instead, I felt something revolutionary: compassion without responsibility. "That sounds really difficult, Bailey," I said, standing to gather my evidence. "I'm sorry you're struggling." Her eyes widened at my response. Empathy without rescue, a distinction that had taken months of therapy to master. "I can help you create a budget," I offered, "but I can't fix this for you. None of us can fix this except you." Mom rose from her chair, reaching toward me with desperate fingers. "Please, Samantha. We're family. Families stick together." I paused at the door, my hand resting on the brass handle. "You're right. Families do stick together. But they also invest in each other equally, celebrate each other's successes, and treat each other with basic respect." I turned to face them one final time. "When you're ready to be a family instead of a hierarchy, you know how to reach me." Walking down the hallway toward the wedding ceremony, I felt lighter than I had in decades. The weight of their expectations, their resentment, their carefully orchestrated guilt had lifted from my shoulders like fog burning away in morning sunlight. In the chapel, Maya had saved me a seat in the middle section. Not with family, but with friends who had chosen to include me in their lives. As the processional music began and Rachel walked down the aisle in her grandmother's restored lace dress, I thought about the different kinds of inheritance we receive. Some people inherit money, property, or social connections. I inherited the knowledge that my worth was never determined by what my family was willing to invest in me, but by what I was willing to accept from them. The wedding reception buzzed with whispered conversations about the Morrison family drama. Apparently, my parents had been making quiet inquiries about borrowing money from relatives, using my mental health crisis as the reason for their financial difficulties. The story was that I'd become unstable and vindictive, cutting off all support to punish them for imagined slights. Uncle Frank cornered me by the gift table, bourbon heavy on his breath. "Your father mentioned you've been difficult lately. Family's important, Samantha. Don't burn bridges you might need to cross again." I sipped my champagne, watching Bailey across the room as she tried to network with wedding guests, her desperation barely masked by forced smiles. "Some bridges are worth burning," I told Uncle Frank, "especially when they only allow traffic in one direction." 6 months later, I received a text from Bailey that changed everything I thought I knew about my family's story. "Dad's in rehab. 90 days sober yesterday. Mom wanted me to tell you, the drinking got worse after you left. A lot worse. He's different now. Clearer." The message included a photo of our father in a sparse apartment, looking smaller somehow, his face carrying the kind of humility that only comes from losing everything you thought defined you. A follow-up text arrived an hour later. "Found something in the attic while helping them downsize." The attachment showed my childhood dollhouse, the one thing I'd truly loved growing up, carefully preserved in tissue paper. Below it, legal documents transferring ownership to me. "Mom says this always belonged to you. She's mailing it tomorrow." The revelations continued over the following weeks as my family's carefully constructed narrative unraveled like a sweater with a pulled thread. Dad's drinking problem had been hidden for years behind closed doors and family loyalty. The favoritism toward Bailey hadn't been preference, it had been panic. She'd been struggling with undiagnosed ADHD and severe anxiety, conditions that manifested as apparent irresponsibility and constant need for rescue. My parents, instead of getting her proper help, had chosen to enable her struggles while expecting me to compensate through overachievement and emotional self-sufficiency. They'd created a system where one daughter was perpetually drowning while the other was expected to throw lifelines without ever asking for help herself. The cruelest twist? They'd convinced themselves this was love. Dr. Martinez, my therapist in San Francisco, helped me process this information without falling back into old patterns of guilt and rescue. Understanding their motivations doesn't require you to accept their behavior, she reminded me during our Tuesday sessions. Empathy and boundaries can coexist. Bailey started calling monthly, a boundary we'd established through careful negotiation. The conversations were different now, honest, uncomfortable, real. She'd started therapy too, finally addressing the underlying issues that had made her dependent on family financial support. She was working 2 jobs and living in a studio apartment, learning skills she should have developed decades earlier. "I used to resent how easy everything was for you," she admitted during one call. "Now I realize it wasn't easy. You just weren't allowed to show when it was hard." Mom and Dad's messages became less frequent but more authentic. No more manipulation wrapped in parental concern. No more attempts to guilt me into resuming my role as family fixer. Dad's sobriety had apparently stripped away the alcohol-fueled entitlement that had driven years of poor decisions. "I'm proud of you," Mom wrote in a letter that arrived 6 months after the wedding confrontation. "Not because you're useful or responsible, but because you're brave. It took courage to walk away from us. Maybe that's the lesson we should have been teaching all along." The letter included photos of them volunteering at a community center, serving meals to homeless families. "Dad's sponsor suggested service work," she explained. "Turns out helping people feels different when you're not keeping score." 1 year after Christmas morning, I hosted my first holiday dinner in my San Francisco apartment. Maya, David, colleagues from work, friends from pottery class. People who chose to spend their holiday with me not because I was useful, but because they enjoyed my company. The dinner table conversation flowed between Maya's latest legal case, David's research on sustainable building materials, and passionate debates about art and science and the future we were all building together. No one mentioned debt, dependency, or family drama. No one expected me to solve their problems or manage their emotions. As I served dessert, a perfectly imperfect tart I'd made myself, I caught my reflection in the dining room window. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the person who had sat on a living room floor clutching a plastic pig, waiting for scraps of parental approval. The piggy bank now sits on my mantel, no longer a symbol of worthlessness, but a reminder of the moment I chose to value myself. I've filled it with dollar bills representing milestones. My promotion, my first pottery sale, the day David told me he loved me not for what I could do for him, but for who I was when I wasn't doing anything at all. Sometimes people ask if I regret cutting ties with my family, if the price of freedom was too high. They don't understand that I didn't cut ties. I simply stopped accepting terms that required me to diminish myself for other people's comfort. My family is still there, slowly learning how to exist without a designated problem solver and emotional caretaker. Dad's sobriety has brought clarity to decades of poor decisions. Mom's therapy has helped her recognize the difference between love and control. Bailey is developing independence she never knew she needed. We text occasionally, sharing updates that don't require rescue or management. Sometimes Mom sends photos of her volunteer work. Dad shares sobriety milestones. Bailey updates me on her progress toward financial stability. The difference is profound. They're not asking me to fix their lives anymore, and I'm not offering to do it. Last month, Bailey sent a package containing a handmade pottery bowl. Clearly her first attempt, imperfect and beautiful in its amateur honesty. The attached note read, Thank you for showing me that worth isn't about what other people give you. It's about what you refuse to accept. Some people might call this a happy ending, a family reunion where everyone learns valuable lessons and bonds are stronger than ever. But this isn't that kind of story. This is the story of a woman who discovered that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who mistake your strength for an invitation to take advantage of you. The $2 piggy bank taught me the most expensive lesson of my life. Your worth isn't determined by what others are willing to invest in you. It's determined by what you're willing to accept from them. Today, I know exactly what I'm worth, and it's not for sale at any price. But here's the final twist that even I didn't see coming until much later. The real revenge wasn't that my family suffered consequences for their favoritism. The real revenge was that I stopped needing revenge at all. When you build a life based on your own values instead of other people's approval, their opinion of you becomes irrelevant. When you surround yourself with people who value you for who you are rather than what you provide, toxic relationships lose their power to hurt you. The greatest revenge against people who treat you as less than your worth is becoming someone who knows exactly how much you're worth and refusing to negotiate. My name is Samantha Reed, and I'm worth far more than $2. It just took me 34 years to figure that out.